Hi friends and fellow artists, anyone who's got lost down the YouTube rabbit hole and has got no idea how they ended up here. In this charcoal drawing tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to draw this still life of 2 jugs, an apple and some plums. Now try to contain your excitement. I know you can't wait to get started on such an enthralling subject matter, but there are just a few quick bases that we need to cover first. All joking aside, as much as this doesn't seem like the most exciting subject in the world to be drawing, it was actually one of my most popular lessons on a website called Art Tutor that I created it for a few years ago. And I think one of the reasons for that is that it's very achievable to both newcomers to charcoal and newcomers to drawing in general. For example, here are some of my student images, and please bear in mind that these people are mostly complete beginners. They've not really done any drawing since high school, and I think they look pretty good. So I've listed the materials that you need in the description, and you can download the reference photograph from there as well. And if you want to save or bookmark this video to follow along at another time, then please go ahead and do that. I don't want you to just watch this passively. That's not what it's designed for. I want you to have a nice piece of art that you're really happy with by the end, and more importantly, some techniques and skills that you can take forward into all of your future artwork. Any questions or comments, pop them below. I do read them all. I don't always get a chance to reply to everything. I try to reply to all the questions, so pop them below. All right, I'm going to pass you over now to my younger self from a few years back so that you can make a start. Now, like I tend to say in many of my classes, there are a number of ways that you can establish your initial outline drawing or laying, and that goes for any subject matter. We cover many of them in the Drawing Essentials course, so maybe have a look at that if you need a refresher. What I definitely don't want you to do is to trace this particular photograph or use the traditional grid method. Let's use this lesson as an opportunity to practice some skills that are at least somewhat transferable to drawing from life. Maybe not completely so, but certainly much more than using a grid method, for example. So the first thing I want to do is just establish some of the major breakpoints and some of the major proportions within the scene as a whole. So I'm going to be looking for where this jug here touches this jug. So where is this point here in relation to the picture plane as a picture frame as a whole? It's almost halfway across. What about the height of this jug? Where's that going to be? The height of this jug, the bottom of the apple. So I'm just going to make a few marks on my paper just to establish those. So the jug I'm looking at is going to be somewhere roughly around here. And then the top, somewhere around here. So if I go across, it's around about, you just pull the photograph back in. If I take a line across, it's around about 1/3, maybe a little more than 1/3. But we don't need to be deadly accurate with still life subject matter. This is just about getting major shapes and major proportions in. So the bottom of the apple is going to be around about there. And then we can maybe make a mark for the width of the apple. Maybe the top of the jug, somewhere around here, and the side of the jug we know is a little bit further to the right than the apple, somewhere around there. Side of this jug, somewhere in that region, and then the plums here are going to be in this region here. Okay, so that will do. I don't need too many in. Too many lines is going to start getting confusing, but you can see that the overall shape starts to look like a set of stairs, a stair-step shape, which is what our reference photograph looks like too. Now the next step for me is to put in big basic shapes. So we're starting very, very general, very loose, and then we're going to get more specific, more refined until we've got the drawing that we want. So the basic shape I'm going to put in for the apple is obviously just a sphere, and I'm not worried about the shape of the sphere. I'm just thinking about the size. For the jug, the most important shape or the most important line on the jug is this angle here. So I can use my pencil to measure this angle, get an approximation. If I was doing this from life, I would hold that up at arm's length, keeping a locked elbow. But with a reference photograph, we can hold it down and then we can transfer that onto our paper. And you know, the best thing to do normally with this is to make your best guess and then check it against your reference photograph. Don't get too hung up on trying to get it right first time. Okay, we've got the angle for the spout, and I'm not really worried about the length of the spout or anything like that at this stage. What I can do is take a line, like a plumb line down from where I think the break is, That's just outside the apple. If I bring my reference photograph in, you can see that it's probably a little bit further to the left. So my break point is going to be, that's good enough. It's in about that region. That's good enough for me. Okay, from here we can put in an oval or an ellipse for the mouth. And again, I'm just running the pencil around until I get what I think is an approximate size. I can see from the reference photograph that the outer edge of the mouth of the jug, again, touches the apple somewhat. So I maybe need to be back here a little bit. And the other side is around about just outside this edge of the apple. So our oval is around about that shape there. Now for the top and bottom of the handle, all I want to represent this with is a couple of ovals. So again, if I bring this back in, I'm going to break this into a simple oval shape, and then I'm going to place an oval shape there as though I chopped through the handle and I was looking at a cross section of that. And what that will help me do is get this angle here, so this angle line here, and also the correct distance between them, because at this stage that's far more important than the curvature or the shape of the handle. So that's going to be somewhere in this region here, and then somewhere in that region there. And I can just make any checks that I want to by, again, taking a plumb line down to the outside of the apple. So that's going to be touching that there, and I'm looking at the angle that this makes with the apple here. What angle does that make? Is that the same on my reference photograph? I'm confident that it's fairly reasonably accurate. Then the bottom of the jug, even though we can only see this portion here, rather than just putting that line in, I want to just take it right through the shape of the apple and take it round the back, even though this is all going to be, as you'll see later on, in the dark. We're not going to be able to see this. I just want to get a nice balanced feel for that shape. And as I get more confident, I can just start to put in a few extra lines, start looking at where the bottle curves around. This probably needs to be a bit higher. So you can look at the angle there. For the leaves on the apple itself, an oval, just want to get the size. I'm not worried about the shape. Once I've got the size and the proportion to each other, the shape becomes so much easier. Small cylinder there for the stalk. Bit of a shape in for that leaf there. We don't need to worry about that one yet. And then let's put this first plum in. So what you can do with your photograph, just have a look at the distance between the two plums there. Maybe an angle with the jug. So if we carried this line down, how would that intersect this plum? It would take a slice off the edge there, wouldn't it? So let's use that as our indication. Or the other thing you can do as well is look at the bottom of the plum. Where is it sitting in relation to the apple? So it's further back, therefore the bottom is higher up than the bottom of the apple, but only slightly. So with that line there and this line here, we know that our plum is going to be in this region. So the next thing now is just the size. There's a stalk there, isn't there? And then a leaf shape. And this leaf shape here. Probably needs to be a little bit further over. But because you're putting it in so loosely, you are that much more willing and able to make changes to your marks, make sure that they're accurate with your sizes, the kind of thing that you're not wanting to do really when you've put a lot of effort into getting the shape right. Okay? And then the next plum is, again, another simple oval. What kind of negative space have we got here? What kind of a gap have we got? Obviously it's sitting lower down. This is more on the line of the apple. So we need to bring this down a little bit, don't we? That's too high up. Centre stone there and the stalk in. And then The outer edge of the plum roughly marries up, so that's okay, marries up with the outer edge of the jug. So for the jug now, we can put in this oval, this circle for the mouth of the jug. So I want to take this as a complete circle, and I'm just going to look at how does it intersect or dissect the top of the plum. And obviously that assumes you've got the position of the top of the plum right, but again, as long as you're reasonably accurate, it's going to be good enough for a still life. So there's the mouth opening, and then we can just look at the width of the mouth. It's a narrower distance here than it is here because of the angle that the jug is lying. This side of the jug, important that it intersects this jug here. So it's not a kissing edge or a shared edge as it's known. And then let's look at the handle here. So all I want to put in is an angle. So I'm going to guess that it's something around there. Bring your reference photograph in, hold the pencil over, and that's fairly accurate, that's reasonable, I'm happy with that one. The curve of the jug in, we know that the top of it is there, so we need to start this a little bit further back. So it's more that sort of shape. We've got this plum in here. Again, taking it through the shape, look how it hides behind this lip of the jug. So taking it through this plum. And then we've got one that's sat here. I'm looking at the negative space here. So that shape, look how it compares to the negative shape that you've got there. That's an abstract shape. Abstract shapes are a lot easier for your eye to see and to reproduce because you've got no preconceived ideas as to what it should be. And then we've got this foremost plum, or this left-hand side plum, and the indication of the stalk there. So once you've got to this stage, just take a step back and check the size and proportion of each of the objects relative to each other. Are you happy with those? Are you happy with the overall shape, the basic shape, maybe the twist in the jug? This jug here is facing away from us, isn't it? So the spout is over here, the handle is more towards us. So are you getting that representation with your basic shapes? And once you are happy with those basic shapes, then take your eraser, kneadable eraser is best, and erase those lines back enough so that you can still just about see them, but they give you a relatively clean piece of paper to work on again. And then take your time and draw those lines back in more neatly. But my tip to you when you do that is to look at the negative space. So look at this shape here that is made between these two jugs. Look at the space between the apple and this plum. Look at this space here. Look at this shape here, this one that we've already talked about, the shape inside the handle here. These negative shapes are what are going to help you really nail the accuracy of the shape instead of trying to draw the positive jug, the positive apple in all of the time. So I'm going to erase my drawing back, draw it up more neatly, and then we'll come in and start adding the charcoal. So I've got my dark charcoal pencil, and the way that I'm going to approach this is to block in all of the major shadow shapes, both the cast shadows. So the cast shadows would be these where a shadow is being cast onto the surface below, and the form shadows. And the form shadows are the shadows within the object, this side of the jug, this side of the apple, that the light can't get to. So I'm going to suggest that you block all of those in first, because what that's going to help you to do, and is going to force you to remember, is that this is very much about value and creating a balance between values rather than individual detail on individual objects. So I've drawn in a couple of the shadow shapes, but not many of them, just so you can see how I'm going to do that. And the first one that I'm going to do is on the jug. So I'm just going to make a rough indication of where that is, just looking at the shape. And then what I want to do is, when I shade these in, is follow the lines of the contours of the jug itself. And although many of these marks aren't going to be seen eventually, the one or two that do show through are just going to help to describe the contours of the surface of the jug and the other objects that we do. And you can see by the way that I'm going right through the outside of the jug, and that's reminding me to take this same value all the way into the background. You know, we can't see anything of the outside edge. And look how I'm going to lose this shape, so I'm not going to be precious about shapes that I've, I suppose, taken time to draw in. It doesn't matter. And when you get to this area around here, if you don't have a sharp point on your charcoal pencil, do take the time, you know, to go and sharpen with your craft knife and your sanding block. So I can go all the way over this handle, shadow goes all the way over to there. Get back into the jug and we're back to those marks. And then I think what is a good idea is to take your marks from the dark side across to the light, because that will naturally reduce the pressure on the charcoal pencil, which just helps to get this transition from a light to dark. But we're going to do some blending with the blending stump in a moment. Okay, so that's the major shadow on this side of the jug. We'll put some dark value into the top there later on. So we can get shadows on this side of the apple. So starting underneath the apple where it's going to be darkest, taking the marks out, just letting them fade off slightly. Goes right underneath here. This will be called an occlusion shadow, where no light can get to at all. It's the darkest area. And then just look how dark this side of the apple is. It goes, if you defocus your eyes, you can see that basically there's a shape, a crescent-like shape, where the apple just goes into the background. Because we turn the contrast up on this photograph, we can block this in all as one shape. Okay, so I'm just doing the darkest areas of shadow for now, because there is obviously then another shadow around here. We'll come on to that in a moment. Some real strong darks in and around the centre stalk here. And this is all you're going to be using to describe it. So, you know, when you blow up the contrast in the way that we have done, it just allows you to describe things with blocks of value and blocks of tone, as opposed to intricate little details. Okay, and then back to this area here, so really dark in here. I want to get a nice clean edge with the apple. If you want to, wherever you see a light edge, you can just erase your pencil mark. That's going to help that edge really stand out when we put the white pencil on there. Now, I'm not using any kind of protective piece of paper here to stop my hand from disturbing the charcoal here. By all means, use that if you feel that you need to. Piece of printer paper or greaseproof kitchen paper is fine. It doesn't matter if you disturb the charcoal too much, because the nature of charcoal is that it should be a little bit messy and a little bit free and loose, and it's easily rectifiable as well. So it's not a necessity, but if it's something that you want just to keep your image cleaner and neater, by all means go ahead and use that. So I'm just going to look for this outer edge, and we can see that this whole area is dark. So let's fill that in and speed things up as I do. So I'm happy now that I've got in my darkest darks, the deep cast shadows and form shadows. It's now time to put in the lightest lights. So we're going from one extreme to the other. And what that does is it establishes the tonal range, the value range, your lightest light and your darkest dark. The one that stands out for me the most is this highlight, or this area on the apple here. That's a bright white, but I'm also going to put in areas for the jug here in the white charcoal pencil, areas on the peach. There's a little highlight there, and pick out some pieces where I can see them that are the lightest light, this handle as well. So let's start with the area on the apple. So I want to take it right to the edge. In fact, what I can do is just clean up any marks that are there just with the eraser. That just gives me a nice clean surface. So find the edge of the apple, and then this area here, this is our lightest light. And we do have light values going in. I'm following the contour of the apple. That's important. I'm thinking about how the shape curves around. Some lights just up here as well. Some on the edge of this leaf here. Thin highlight here. Sometimes if you can have a look around your picture and see any that are really thin highlights, it's best to address those first just while your pencil's a bit sharper. Just a more economical way of doing things. So I'm struggling to get a really white highlight there, and that's simply because of the pencil mark underneath, and the white charcoal pencil is picking up that pencil at graphite and is preventing me from getting a nice white highlight. So it is definitely a benefit if you erase any areas that you think are going to be or that need to be in highlight. Just clean those back first. We maybe learn a lesson and do that on the handle. So when I get to this area again, I'm going to use the same marks, same kind of marks, just to show the contours of the jug. Some nice highlights on this leaf here. Okay, let's move on to this plum. So get rid of our pencil lines again. So just looking at the lightest areas. You can increase and decrease the pressure. So decreasing the pressure is obviously going to get you a slightly less light tone or a darker tone, and then increasing the pressure is going to get you the lightest tone you can. So really digging the pencil in where I can see those bright lights, those bright highlights, and then just lifting the pressure off. We are going to come on to doing some blending in a moment, both with the blending stump and the pencil itself. Just trying to stick to only where there's a bright highlight at this stage. Obviously we're going to need to come back in and make all those values that are in between the lightest light and the darkest dark. But at this stage I'm just resisting the temptation to go in with any values that are somewhere between that lightest light and darkest dark. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the charcoal pencil now, the dark charcoal pencil, and start adding some of those values in between. It's given us a nice range of extremes, and it's a lot easier to compare things against that too. So back with the dark charcoal pencil, and let's start with the apple. So I want to deal with this shadow here. So I'm just going to reduce the pressure, reducing it more and more as we get to this terminator line here, as it's called, so the area where the light can no longer reach. Okay, and then just looking at some of the patterns within the apple, some of the markings. Just adding a little bit of tone for those. And then what I can do is take a blending stump, and remember I'm going to use one end or one stump for your darks and one for your lights. So all I'm going to do is just help the transition And it is going to reduce the value slightly, but that's not a problem because we can go back over. And then if you start in the dark area as I have done there, if I now go into this area, it's going to put too much tone down, so you can see how much is on there. It's going to put too much down, so either just to the side of your paper, just get rid of that tone on a scrap bit of paper, or use the other end. So you could actually use one stick for your darks, and this is if you go into your real dark stuff. This one as it transitions into the lighter area. So if I start in this area now and then work back in, that's going to help smooth that out without laying too much tone down. You don't want to get rid of all the texture. You want to try and retain some of it. Use this as a drawing tool as well, so any bits of dark that you see that are really subtle that you can put in with the end of this. And if I take the other one, and then I can do the same for the light. So just blending that in, smoothing it out. Just clean any excess off on a spare bit of paper. And now it's just a case of going back over and strengthening any darks that you've lost. Okay, and then let's do a little bit of work on the leaf. So if you go back to your dark blending stick or the dark end, first thing to do is just pull some tone into the areas where it fades off, rather than laying any more down. Just see how you get on with that. Your lights as well, just blending them out, just the edges. So you're just feathering the edges out and then seeing what you're left with, strengthening any darks that you need to, adding in a bit more value if you need to. You know, the grey undertone of the paper is there for a reason. You should be using that as one of your values, so you don't want to get rid of it all completely. Don't feel that you have to have, you know, the white charcoal going directly into the dark charcoal and vice versa. Okay, and then let's do a little bit of work on the jug as well. This is quite a strong shadow line, so there doesn't need to be a lot of blending. So I'm just going to blend out and then in, so I don't create too much or take too much value outwards. And then I can do the same for the white. And then just with whatever tone is on the pencil, you can see you've got this dark line here, but then you've got this secondary form shadow here. You just want to blend that out a little bit more. Just drawing around the apple shape here. So this value down here is a bit darker, isn't it? If you just notice it next to the apple, how it gets darker down here. Let's use the blending stump for that there. It's quite a smooth texture. Any places you see that it just needs to smoothen off, soften off slightly, just go in with the blending stick. This area in here has got a little bit of value, so what you can do, just pick some up from the side and just draw in with your blending stump just to get that nice subtle shadow effect. And then if you want to, with your charcoal pencil, just right at the bottom edge, just to strengthen this white line and really make it stand out, and just darken it just along that top edge there. Okay, the handle just needs a bit of refining, so let's look at this shape here. So it's a lighter value obviously than the background. but darker than this highlight on the edge of the handle itself. So just with a bit of light pressure, just toning that back. And what you want is to be darker around the bottom, so that the lightest part is around here, darkest around the, darker again around the top edge. And then we can just soften that edge slightly. This is a nice crisp line, isn't it? So let's get that in nice and crisp. And then here the shadow just softens off into this area where we can leave it basically the value of the ground, the colour ground that we're using. Okay, moving across the picture now. And by the way, this isn't necessarily the best way to work from right to left. You know, you tend to smudge things a little bit with your hand. Can sometimes be better if you work from left to right. But you can use that protective piece of paper if you want to. I'm just not too concerned. I think it's within the nature of charcoal for you to get smudge marks and it to be quite loose. So I need to tone this area down here, and you can see that around this top edge it starts to disappear completely. So around the outer edges really blends in, and it's lightest in the middle. So just reducing the pressure, and I retain the outer edge of that leaf. And then for the leaf itself, so we've got some darks in here, but I just wanted to try and retain negatively, so drawing around some of the vein shapes, or just an impression of the vein shapes. You're never going to get them all in even with a charcoal pencil, no matter how sharp it is. And then in the same way, we can do a little bit of work on the plum itself. So just looking at, or noticing how this is not really a soft transition. There's a definite transition, isn't there? So I'm using a light pressure, maybe blend it in a little bit of the edge, but I want to show that there's that texture difference rather than just a smooth gradation. Okay, if you want to soften that slightly, you can do. Won't go too much, too overboard. Just touch in very lightly. And then onto the next one. So we've got some nice texture here. There's almost a slight cross-hatching texture. I'm not really going to be able to show this with a charcoal pencil. But if I make the attempt to make those marks, some of them may be picked up. It may work, it may not. And if it doesn't work, you haven't lost anything. So these three plums we can tackle in exactly the same way as this one. So let's just move on to the jug, add a little bit of rendering on this. So nice light pressure just around this area, same sort of strokes, following the contours of the jug itself. And then there's a bit of shadowing, isn't there, on the handle. So let's get that in, take it up into the shadow. Got some shadow in here. Some shadow, nice shadow just under this part of the handle. That really helps to describe the shape. And then if you look on, just bring the picture in, if you look on this part of the jug, so it starts to get darker in this area. That's just an important little subtlety. If you just add a bit of value just in this bottom corner here, that's going to just help to depict the curvature of the jug as it falls away to the other side. Okay, so I'm just going to put in these 3 plums here, and then we'll come in, add some background, and we're done. So all that's left for me to do now is to add some background texture and a little bit of foreground texture as well. And this is really going to help lift everything. So a good tip here is to get, if you have one, a little stubby pencil that you get into the end of your use for your charcoal pencil. And that's a great thing to use for the background, because you will wear it down really quickly. So rather than just throwing those little stubby pencils away, save them for this. So there's our background in. All that's left for me to do is just add a little bit of foreground texture. So there's some nice white values in there in the white stonewash wood. So we can put those in between the gaps, just keeping your lines nice and horizontal, parallel to the bottom of your picture. You're not worried about getting rid of any of the smudge marks. I think that adds to the character. So just intertwining these amongst the shadows. Got a nice one there. And then finally, dark charcoal pencil. You can add a few of these cracks in the wood, just to add some texture and character to this, this foreground, very simply. Try and keep your lines nice and thin if you can, because we're looking at these at the angle we are. They would only ever appear quite thin. And if you feel you've lost any little highlights, just bring those up as the very last thing to do. Or maybe just on the outer edge of the leaf, just those little fine highlights here and there. And I think we can call that done. So really good exercise for you to do, really helps to train your eye to see those shadow shapes, those light and dark tones. And one thing that you really can't fail to do with a study like this, using black and white charcoal, is to get a real wide range of values. So a darkest dark that is very, very black, very dark, and a lightest light that is obviously nice and white. And when you get that wide range of values, you usually end up with quite a striking, quite a dramatic final piece, a final drawing. So have a go at that. I hope you enjoy it. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next lesson.